August 30th, 1940, 6:15 p.m. RAF Biggin Hill, Kent. Group Captain Richard Grice stood at his office window, watching the evening sun cast long shadows across the airfield. Behind him, intelligence officers were studying the latest reconnaissance photographs taken by German aircraft that morning. The images showed Biggin Hill in perfect detail. 3 runways, dispersed hangars, revetments protecting Spitfires and Hurricanes, operations buildings, fuel storage, everything that made Biggin Hill one of Fighter Command's most critical bases for defending London. What concerned Grice wasn't what the photographs showed, but what they didn't show. 2 miles to the east, in a farmer's field that had been empty farmland in July, now sat what appeared to be another RAF airfield. Not the real Biggin Hill, but a carefully constructed duplicate complete with hangars, aircraft, vehicles, and all the infrastructure that made an airfield worth attacking. German reconnaissance had photographed it repeatedly, and intelligence analysis suggested the Luftwaffe believed both airfields were operational. The question wasn't whether the Germans would attack. Intelligence intercepts and reconnaissance patterns made clear that Biggin Hill was marked for destruction. The Luftwaffe understood its importance, sitting just 20 miles from London, close enough that fighters based there could intercept bombers before they reached the capital. Destroying Biggin Hill would open a gap in London's defenses that couldn't be quickly filled. The question was which Biggin Hill the Germans would attack, the real airfield with its operational squadrons, or the fake one with its canvas hangars and wooden aircraft. Grice had argued strenuously for the deception plan when it was proposed in July. The traditional approach to defending airfields involved dispersal, camouflage, and anti-aircraft guns, but analysis of raids across Europe showed this was inadequate. German bombers, arriving in formations of dozens or hundreds, could saturate defenses and destroy airfields despite protective measures. Repairing damage took days or weeks during which the airfield couldn't operate effectively. The RAF needed something better than passive defense. They needed to make the Germans attack the wrong target entirely. The fake airfield, officially designated K site in planning documents but called Biggin Hill Ghost by the construction crews who built it, represented a radical approach to airfield defense. Instead of trying to hide the real airfield or harden it against attack, make the Germans believe there were 2 airfields and ensure they attacked the fake one. The concept seemed absurd when first proposed. German reconnaissance was sophisticated, their photo interpreters trained to detect deception. But Colonel John Turner, the officer who championed the plan, argued that effective deception didn't require fooling all observers, just fooling them long enough to waste their bombs on worthless targets. Construction had begun in late July with urgency driven by intelligence suggesting major raids were imminent. 200 workers, many of them carpenters and painters conscripted from London theatre companies, transformed an empty field into what appeared from altitude to be a fully operational RAF station. They built hangar frameworks from timber and covered them with painted canvas. They constructed dummy aircraft from plywood and canvas stretched over wooden frames. They installed lighting rigs that mimicked airfield operations at night. They even created fake bomb craters and repair crews to suggest the decoy was being actively defended and maintained. The level of detail was extraordinary. Dummy aircraft weren't just static props but were moved periodically to suggest operational activity. Canvas hangars had doors that opened and closed on schedules matching real squadron operations. Vehicles, also constructed from wood and canvas, drove visible patterns around the fake airfield. From 15,000 feet, where German bombers typically operated, the decoy was indistinguishable from a real airfield. Even from 5,000 feet, careful observation was required to detect the deception. But Grice understood that construction quality alone wouldn't ensure success. The deception required the Germans to believe that K site was more important or more vulnerable than the real Biggin Hill. This meant deliberately making the real airfield less visible while making the fake one more attractive as a target. Real hangars were camouflaged with netting and paint schemes that broke up their outlines. Real aircraft were dispersed and hidden in revetments. Meanwhile, the fake hangars were kept clearly visible, and fake aircraft were parked in neat, vulnerable rows that screamed, "Bomb me." The lighting plan was particularly sophisticated. At night, the real Biggin Hill observed strict blackout procedures, shutting down all external lighting to avoid giving German bombers aiming points. The fake airfield, by contrast, maintained lighting patterns designed to look like an operational base where blackout discipline was lax. Crews would accidentally leave lights on in fake buildings, illuminate fake runways briefly as if guiding aircraft, and even set off flares occasionally to suggest night operations. From German bomber crews searching for targets in darkness, these lighting violations would be irresistible aiming points. The psychological warfare extended to radio traffic. The real Biggin Hill maintained radio silence where possible, communicating through landlines to avoid direction finding. The fake airfield had transmitters broadcasting fake radio traffic, scramble orders, weather reports, simulated pilot communications, all designed to suggest an active fighter base. German signals intelligence, monitoring these transmissions, would conclude that both Biggin Hill locations were operational, potentially making the fake one an equally valuable target. By August 30th, the deception had been operating for 4 weeks. German reconnaissance had photographed K site repeatedly, and intercepted Luftwaffe communications suggested they believed it was a legitimate RAF facility. Intelligence analysts had identified references to Biggin Hill East and Biggin Hill West in German planning documents, indicating the Luftwaffe thought there were 2 separate airfields in the area. The deception was working. Now it needed to survive its first real test, a major raid that intelligence predicted would come within days. The raid came on August 31st, earlier than expected but matching the patterns intelligence had predicted. At 8:03 a.m., chain-home radar detected large formations assembling over France. Fighter Command Headquarters tracked the raids crossing the channel, calculating vectors and likely targets. The size and composition suggested this was a maximum effort attack aimed at Fighter Command's most critical airfields. Biggin Hill was certainly on the target list. The question was which Biggin Hill the Germans would hit. At 8:47 a.m., the answer became clear. Over 90 Heinkel He-111 and Dornier Do-17 bombers, escorted by Messerschmitt fighters, approached Biggin Hill from the southeast, but their heading took them directly toward K site rather than the real airfield. The deception was working. German navigators, using reconnaissance photographs to identify their target, were guiding their formations to attack the fake airfield. Everything now depended on whether the bombers would recognize the deception before releasing their bombs. Grice, watching from the real Biggin Hill operations room, could hear the distant sound of aircraft engines and anti-aircraft fire from the K site area. The fake airfield had been equipped with actual anti-aircraft guns, manned by crews who understood their role was to make the deception convincing rather than to shoot down aircraft. They fired at the bombers, not expecting to hit anything but creating the appearance of defended airspace that bombers would expect over a real airfield. This detail, seemingly minor, was crucial to maintaining the illusion. The first bombs fell at 8:51 a.m. Grice listened to reports from observers positioned near K site describing the attack. High explosive bombs cratered the fake runways. Incendiaries set fake hangars ablaze, the canvas and wood burning with spectacular effect that looked convincing from altitude. Fragmentation bombs shredded the dummy aircraft parked in their vulnerable rows. For 15 minutes, German bombers systematically destroyed K site, dropping approximately 180 bombs in concentrated patterns designed to obliterate an operational airfield. From the German perspective, the raid was textbook perfect. Bomb aimers reported direct hits on hangars, aircraft destroyed on the ground, runways cratered, facilities burning. The bombers faced anti-aircraft fire and some fighter opposition, exactly what they'd expect attacking a critical RAF base. Several aircraft were damaged. 2 were shot down by RAF fighters that had scrambled from other bases, and the formation took casualties that confirmed they'd struck a well-defended target. Everything suggested a successful mission against a strategically important airfield. Back at their bases in France, German intelligence officers analyzed strike photographs and aircrew reports. The consensus was that Biggin Hill East had been severely damaged, possibly rendered non-operational for several days. This assessment was reported to Luftwaffe High Command and incorporated into planning for subsequent raids. The operation was considered successful enough that additional raids against the same target were planned for the following days to ensure the airfield remained suppressed. What the Germans didn't realize was that they just expended significant resources, accepted casualties, and achieved exactly nothing of military value. The hangars they'd destroyed were canvas. The aircraft they'd burned were plywood and wood frames. The runways they'd cratered were dirt paths that had never been intended for aircraft operations. The vehicles and equipment were stage props built by theater carpenters. The entire target was worthless, yet German planning now assumed they'd struck a significant blow against Fighter Command's defensive capability. The raid on August 31st was followed by additional attacks on September 1st and 2nd. Each time, German bombers targeted K site, guided by reconnaissance photographs showing an operational airfield. Each time, they dropped hundreds of bombs destroying fake infrastructure while the real Biggin Hill, 2 miles away, continued operating normally. British repair crews working openly at K site replaced destroyed dummy aircraft and patched fake hangars, ensuring the target remained attractive for subsequent raids. The deception had become self-sustaining. Germans attacked, destroyed fake facilities, and were shown evidence the target was being repaired, justifying additional attacks. By September 3rd, German intelligence estimated they dropped over 1,800 bombs on Biggin Hill East across multiple raids. Their photo interpreters noted extensive damage and reported the airfield was likely non-operational, but intercepted British communications, actually fake radio traffic from K site's transmitters, suggested the base was somehow still active. This created confusion in German planning. Some officers argued the airfield should be considered destroyed. Others insisted additional raids were necessary to finish it off. The debate resulted in continued attacks that wasted resources on a target that had never been valuable. The real Biggin Hill, meanwhile, operated throughout this period with minimal interference. Some German bombers, unable to locate K site due to weather or navigation errors, attacked the real base, but these raids were smaller and less coordinated than the massive strikes hitting the decoy. Damage to the real Biggin Hill was manageable, quickly repaired, and never prevented the base from operating. The squadrons based their continued flying defensive patrols, intercepting German raids and protecting London. German planning assumed these squadrons were based elsewhere, having concluded Biggin Hill was too damaged to support operations. The deception's success exceeded even optimistic predictions. Intelligence estimates suggested that perhaps 30–40% of raids might be diverted to the fake airfield. The actual number exceeded 70%. Of approximately 600 German bombers that attempted to attack Biggin Hill in late August and early September 1940, more than 420 dropped their bombs on K site. This represented thousands of tons of ordnance, expended destroying theatrical props, while the actual target remained operational. The cost-benefit calculation was extraordinary. K site cost approximately £15,000 to construct, roughly $2 million in modern currency. The bombs wasted on it represented munitions worth tens of millions, not counting the fuel, aircraft wear, and most importantly, the aircrew casualties from defending fighters that might otherwise have faced different targets. From a purely economic perspective, the return on investment was remarkable. From a military perspective, it was transformative. But the deception's value wasn't just in preserving Biggin Hill. It was in demonstrating that large-scale tactical deception could work against a sophisticated opponent using modern reconnaissance technology. German intelligence was skilled, their photo interpreters were trained professionals, and their planning incorporated extensive reconnaissance. Yet they were fooled by painted canvas and wooden aircraft, because the deception matched their expectations and confirmed their biases about what an RAF airfield looked like. The success of K-Site led to rapid expansion of the deception program. By late September 1940, most critical RAF airfields in southern England had associated decoy sites. These weren't identical to K-Site. Each was customized based on local terrain and the specific airfield being protected, but they followed the same principles. Make the fake more visible and apparently vulnerable than the real, maintain the deception through constant activity and updates, and create multiple indicators that confirmed for German intelligence that the decoy was genuine. The decoy airfields were supplemented by other deception efforts. Fake factories were constructed near real industrial targets, complete with roof lighting patterns that mimicked production facilities. Dummy fuel storage tanks were positioned to draw attacks from real storage sites. Even fake cities were created using elaborate lighting rigs in unpopulated areas, designed to deceive German bombers navigating by visual landmarks at night. The K-Site success had proven that deception worked, and British planners exploited this realization aggressively. German intelligence eventually recognized some of the deception but never understood its full scale. By October 1940, Luftwaffe photo interpreters had identified several fake airfields and marked them as decoys in planning documents. But many others, including K-Site, remained classified as legitimate targets in German files until the war's end. Post-war examination of captured German intelligence files showed K-Site marked as Biggin Hill Secondary Base, destroyed September 1940, believed abandoned. The Germans never realized they'd been attacking a fake. The psychological impact on German planning was significant. Luftwaffe intelligence, having been fooled repeatedly, became increasingly paranoid about deception. This led to second-guessing of reconnaissance intelligence and debates about whether observed targets were real or fake. Some genuine targets weren't attacked because intelligence officers suspected they were decoys. This hesitation, born from being deceived at sites like K-Site, diluted German bombing effectiveness throughout the remainder of the Battle of Britain. The success also created unexpected challenges for British deception planners. Once the program expanded to dozens of fake airfields, factories, and other targets, maintaining consistency and quality became difficult. Some hastily constructed decoys were obvious fakes even from altitude. Others were convincing when built, but deteriorated over time as weather-damaged materials and maintenance crews couldn't keep up with repairs. German intelligence learned to identify markers of fake construction. Certain materials aged differently than real structures. Dummy aircraft never showed maintenance activity. Fake airfields never accumulated the debris and clutter that characterized real bases. This led to an escalating sophistication war. British deception crews added more realistic details. Fuel stains under fake aircraft, trash around fake buildings, muddy vehicle tracks around fake hangars. German photo interpreters developed better detection techniques, measuring shadow lengths to identify flat painted surfaces, looking for patterns in how facilities were maintained, checking for vegetation growth that would be disturbed around real facilities but might be undisturbed around fakes. Each side refined their techniques based on observed successes and failures. Wing Commander John Turner, whose proposal had led to K-Site's creation, was assigned to systematize deception doctrine based on lessons learned. His manual, distributed to deception units in late 1940 emphasized principles that remain relevant to military deception today. Match the target's expected characteristics, create supporting evidence across multiple intelligence channels, maintain the deception through continuous updates, and most importantly, understand what the enemy looks for and provide exactly that. Turner's doctrine also addressed the economics of deception. A fake airfield that cost £15,000 and diverted even a single raid of 100 bombers had extraordinary return on investment. The bombs alone were worth more than the decoy, not counting fuel, aircraft wear, and potential casualties. This meant deception units could operate with budgets that seemed lavish, but were actually minuscule compared to the value of assets being protected. Turner successfully argued for expanding the deception program, eventually creating over 200 decoy sites protecting airfields, factories, ports, and cities across Britain. The human element of maintaining deception was often overlooked in official accounts. The crews operating sites like K Site worked in dangerous conditions, maintaining deceptions during raids when bombs intended for fake targets sometimes fell on the crews maintaining them. Several deception personnel were killed or wounded by bombs aimed at the fake facilities they were protecting. Their service, operating theatrical props under falling bombs to maintain illusions that saved real bases, exemplified the unglamorous but crucial support roles that made Britain's defense possible. The fake airfield concept was adapted for other deception purposes beyond protecting real facilities. Starfish sites, named for their star-shaped lighting patterns, were created in unpopulated areas to simulate burning cities and draw German bombers away from actual urban targets. During night raids, when German bombers navigated by the fires started by Pathfinder aircraft, Starfish sites would ignite massive pyrotechnics that appeared from altitude to be burning city centers. Bombers following these false fires would drop their loads on empty countryside, while the real cities they intended to attack remained dark and largely unscathed. The effectiveness of starfish deceptions was harder to measure than fake airfields because success meant nothing happened at the protected site. But analysis of German bombing patterns showed that significant percentages of bombs intended for cities fell in unpopulated areas near starfish sites. Over the course of the night bombing campaign, these diversions saved thousands of civilian lives and prevented damage to industrial and port facilities that were crucial to Britain's war effort. The Germans eventually developed some deception capabilities of their own, but never at the scale or sophistication of British programs. This disparity reflected different operational contexts. Germany, on the offensive for most of the war, had less need for defensive deception. Britain, defending against sustained bombing campaigns, was forced to innovate or suffer unacceptable losses. Necessity drove British deception development, while German deception remained a relatively minor aspect of their operational doctrine. Post-war interviews with German bomber crews who had attacked British targets revealed that many suspected they'd been fooled by decoys but couldn't confirm it during operations. The combination of nighttime operations, limited time over target, anti-aircraft fire, and fighter opposition meant crews couldn't carefully assess what they were bombing. They aimed at what looked like the correct target, dropped their bombs, and departed. Whether they'd hit the real facility or a decoy wasn't determinable until intelligence analyzed strike photographs, and even then, determining ground truth was difficult. Some German veterans expressed grudging admiration for British deception efforts when learning about them after the war. Oberleutnant Hans Werner, a Heinkel pilot who participated in raids on Biggin Hill, reviewed photographs of K Site in a 1970s interview and laughed, saying, "We bombed that multiple times, and never realized it was fake. That explains why Biggin Hill kept operating despite us reporting it destroyed. We thought British repair crews were incredibly efficient. Actually, they were incredibly clever. We wasted resources attacking nothing while the real airfield launched fighters against us. That's brilliant in a frustrating way." The broader lesson from K-Site and similar deceptions was that seeing isn't necessarily understanding. German reconnaissance provided accurate photographs of what was physically present: hangars, aircraft, runways, facilities. But photographs couldn't distinguish between real facilities and convincing fakes. Intelligence interpretation, based on assumptions about what airfields looked like and how they operated, concluded that K-Site was genuine because it matched all expected characteristics. The deception worked because it didn't try to be invisible, but instead to be so convincingly visible that Germans believed what they were seeing. This principle, perception management rather than concealment, influenced military deception doctrine for decades. Modern deception operations focus less on hiding forces and more on making adversaries believe false narratives by providing evidence that confirms their assumptions. The technique originated with programs like K-Site, where success came not from hiding Biggin Hill, but from creating a convincing alternative that matched what Germans expected to find. The technological evolution of reconnaissance and intelligence analysis has made some deception techniques obsolete while creating opportunities for new ones. Modern satellite reconnaissance can detect details invisible to 1940s cameras, but generates so much data that analysts face information overload, creating opportunities for deception through misdirection and false emphasis. Cyber operations create new deception possibilities entirely. But the fundamental principles remain. Understand what your adversary looks for, provide evidence that confirms their expectations, and make them waste resources on valueless targets. The economic calculation that made K-Site worthwhile remains relevant. Defensive systems that cost millions but protect assets worth billions are bargains even if they only work occasionally. Deception operations that cost thousands but divert attacks worth millions are extraordinarily cost-effective. Modern military planning incorporates these calculations, allocating resources to deception programs based on expected returns from diverted enemy actions. Turner's analysis from 1940, showing the economics of fake airfields, established frameworks that guide contemporary deception budgeting. RAF Biggin Hill survived the Battle of Britain and continued operations throughout the war, playing crucial roles in defending London, supporting D-Day operations, and offensive fighter sweeps over occupied Europe. The base's survival and effectiveness were directly attributable to K-Site's success in diverting German attacks during the critical months of 1940. Without the deception, Biggin Hill would likely have been destroyed or severely damaged in August or September 1940, creating a gap in London's defenses that couldn't have been quickly filled. K-Site didn't just protect an airfield, it preserved a crucial capability at a strategically vital moment. The broader impact of deception programs on the Battle of Britain's outcome is harder to quantify but certainly significant. Hundreds of tons of German bombs fell on fake targets instead of real ones. German planners made decisions based on intelligence that was systematically corrupted by deception, leading to attacks on wrong targets and incorrect assessments of damage inflicted. RAF resources that would have been consumed repairing real damage were instead available for operations. The cumulative effect was to degrade German bombing effectiveness while preserving British defensive capability, contributing to Germany's failure to achieve air superiority. Group Captain Richard Grice, who commanded Biggin Hill during this period and championed the K-Site deception, was later promoted and assigned to help establish deception units for other commands. His experience with K-Site informed doctrine for protecting airfields throughout the Commonwealth. Post-war, he wrote about the experience. "We proved that in modern warfare, sometimes the best defense isn't stronger walls but convincing the enemy to attack the wrong fortress entirely." K-Site saved Biggin Hill not through resilience but through misdirection. The Germans thought they destroyed us multiple times. We let them believe it while continuing operations they thought impossible. The site of K-Site remained farmland after the war, with no permanent structures marking where one of World War II's most successful deceptions operated. Local residents who'd watched the fake airfield being bombed repeatedly had been told to remain silent about what they'd witnessed, a secrecy that wasn't lifted until decades after the war. Some kept the secret even from family, not revealing until the 1970s or 1980s that the explosions they'd seen were German bombs destroying theatrical props rather than military facilities. Modern military historians studying the Battle of Britain identify deception programs like K-Site as crucial, but often underappreciated factors in British victory. Popular histories focus on fighter pilots, radar technology, and industrial production. These were certainly important, but the unglamorous work of deception units preserving critical infrastructure by fooling German intelligence was equally vital. Without deceptions like K-Site, the quantitative analysis of aircraft and pilot numbers would have favored Germany more strongly, potentially changing outcomes of crucial battles. The legacy of K-Site and similar programs extends beyond World War II. Every modern military incorporates deception units, and doctrine descended from lessons learned in programs like Britain's fake airfields. The principle that shaped perception can be as important as physical capability is now fundamental to military planning. Operations planners consider how adversaries will perceive actions and how to manipulate those perceptions to achieve objectives. This approach to warfare, where the enemy's understanding matters as much as physical forces, was pioneered in programs like K-Site. The 600 German bombers that dropped 1,800 bombs on K-Site and similar decoys weren't poorly trained or incompetent. They were skilled crews following orders based on intelligence that seemed reliable. They attacked what appeared to be legitimate military targets and reported success based on observable damage. The failure was systemic, not individual. German intelligence couldn't distinguish real from fake, because the fakes were designed by people who understood intelligence collection methods and created deceptions specifically to exploit those methods' limitations. This is the ultimate lesson of K-Site. Effective deception requires understanding your adversary's capabilities and creating illusions that will survive their scrutiny not through perfection, but through matching expectations. The fake airfield wasn't perfect when examined closely, but from 15,000 feet through a bomb site while under anti-aircraft fire, it was convincing enough. And convincing enough was sufficient to divert hundreds of bombers and thousands of bombs from real targets, preserving capabilities that helped Britain survive its most dangerous period and eventually achieve victory. The invisible airfield wasn't invisible at all. It was hypervisible, deliberately obvious, convincingly detailed, and positioned perfectly to be more attractive than the real target it protected. Britain's genius wasn't in hiding Biggin Hill, but in creating an alternative so convincing that German bombers chose to attack it instead. Those 600 bombers, dropping their bombs on canvas and wood, proved that seeing isn't always understanding, that intelligence without ground truth can be systematically deceived, and that sometimes the best defense is convincing your enemy to attack something worthless while your real forces remain untouched and operational. K-Site saved Biggin Hill, helped preserve fighter command, and demonstrated principles of military deception that remain fundamental to modern warfare. All for the cost of some timber, canvas, and the brilliant insight that fooling your enemy is often cheaper and more effective than fighting them directly.